Perhaps some of you have done something that I found myself doing again last week. You go into a store and you're just going to get one item. So you don't take a cart, you don't take a basket, but you're walking through the store and you realize, oh, well, I haven't been to this store for a while, I could use another item. So you pick that up, and then before you know it, you've got a few more items, and you're making your way to the checkout counter, and you're realizing that if you do not get to that checkout counter pretty quickly, you're going to drop them all, right? Anyone know this? Yes. It is something that I think we've all experienced. So here's the thing. We have been traveling through a world that none of us planned, that none of us asked for, that none of us really wanted, though we are all gracious and grateful every day that we have another day. And as we travel from the shadow of this global pandemic, many of us are realizing that we have been carrying all these things that we picked up along the way in these last months and years, and it's getting kind of heavy. We feel like we're overburdened and we need to put things down. And worse than that, we feel as if we need to detoxify our spirit, which has been poisoned by the worries and fears of these last years. Now, the May issue of the Buddhist magazine, The Lion's Roar, addressed this need to detox. And this important form of healing, they say, begins with acknowledgement of what it is we have been carrying, all that we have been carrying. Specifically, they say, we must acknowledge greed and hatred and delusion, which are known, as I mentioned before, as the three poisons. In early Buddhist texts, Sean Fite Oakes says, these were known as the three unskilled roots of action. He says they were fixated, self-protective emotional states that shaped our choices and our words. Greed says, get more, and hatred says, lash out. And both depend on delusion, which tells a story about the world and our place in it that is profoundly convincing and painfully wrong. They are the stranglers of our better instincts, generosity, love, and wisdom. The opposite in this tradition of greed is generosity. As one teacher asks, of the things that you are grasping, what are you willing to put down? The opposite in this tradition of hatred is seeing connection and commonality, being able to see the person who is the focus of your anger as another being with their own needs and wants, though they may be different from yours. And the opposite of pain avoidance is taking in the suffering of ourselves and also of others. Self-awareness is the very foundation of self-care. We need to ask ourselves questions. Questions like, what am I clinging to? What am I pushing away? What am I working really hard and taking energy not to see? We often want what we cannot have. We want to return, for example, to another, more innocent, easier, more predictable time for us. Oakes says we want permanence, reliability, and comfort, and so we may sacrifice a lot, including connection and caring for others, in order to get there. We have been picking up one thing and then another for years. When I got to the counter the other night, I felt like I had to tighten my grip. My fingers were so tensed, so painful. I was grasping. I was trying not to think of the pain. And the more I tried not to think of the pain, the only thing I could think of was the pain of trying to hold on that tight. Why? I wondered, why is this happening? And I felt irritation. Could the person in front of me not walk faster? Could the cashier not scan the items faster? Could I not have had more foresight to realize that I was going to need to grab more than one or two things? I spent a lot of time in those very quick moments judging myself. And then after I put everything finally, thank goodness, on the counter, I laid it down on the counter. Then I truly felt the pain in my hands, my arms, my shoulders, my neck. I had been tensed holding that burden for so long, and it wasn't until I could actually release it that that pain was so evident to me. We have been carrying so much, my friends. Greed, that we could just keep having more and more, and this was years ago. Just carrying on and trying to ignore the fact that some were receiving and others were losing. Anger with those early intimations that we got many years ago that a time of racial reckoning was coming, pushing away or denying the signs in a primary season more than 5 years ago that some things that we did not believe could be possible in our society, in our democracy, were in fact going to be possible. And things that we've tried to just deny, such as the way that our summers are heating up, drying up, the ways that fire season has become a season among us, and what that means for all of us. We have been storing up that anger which Valerie Mason Johns, an author who writes about these things, says we can have a kind of anger that is important, but that is slow and smoldering, and that might just come out as little irritations and nastinesses to each other. Or we can have anger that is volcanic and may simply explode around us when one person does the thing, puts one more thing in our arms that we cannot hold. But we are holding this, and we can become people we really don't want to be if we don't acknowledge that all of this has been a weight and it is burdening our hearts and putting toxins and poisons in our souls and spirits. We can, if we acknowledge it, be able to meet the world as it is, to be patient with those who are needing a little more time for re-entry into togetherness. Compassion for those who have been working throughout the pandemic and are now feeling the pains of all they have been carrying, and mindfulness and attention to those who have been hit the hardest by the burdens of what we have all been through, and those whose futures, especially the young adults among us, whose futures feel most burdened right now. If we are attentive, we can respond with generosity, wisdom, and kindness. Generosity, perhaps one of those strands of yarn you could use to remind yourself to give a compliment today. You might even be able to give it to yourself. You could do it right now. That will just take that right off your plate and list of things to do. Or you could do it with somebody here before you leave today, and that will also take care of that. You could embrace somebody else with compassion, somebody that you're feeling irritation at, something you're feeling irritation with. You could try to think it through from the other side, and to be aware of the suffering that is around us and not try to ignore it. You can take some time in the Tonglen meditation tradition to take in suffering and then release it. You can breathe in and imagine the ways that you have been carrying too much. You can breathe out and imagine releasing that out. Compassion is the most powerful antidote to anger. Mason Johns tells us, what do you need to treat with compassion today? What situation do you need to comprehend? Perhaps it is the unvaccinated child or the adult with medical complications. Perhaps it is the person who has been living too much alone, or the person that has been living with too much togetherness. We may think that we do not feel anger or hatred or fear. One Buddhist teacher in this May issue of The Lion's Roar spoke about how he felt that way about hatred, how he was above hatred. He hated no one, until he sat in meditation and stillness and he allowed himself to begin the phrase, I hate. And he realized he could complete it over and over and over again. It was only after he finished acknowledging it that he could let that go. So self-love began my process of dissolving anger, hatred, and fear, Valerie Mason-Johns writes. Admittedly, I had friends and others to support me in my journey, but in the end, I had to do the work on my own, and thus began the freeing of my heart. So let us, today as we are gathered here, giving one another courage and sustenance, straighten our spines and imagine the suffering of another person we've been trying to deny, and then relax and let that go. Let us notice what we've been carrying, because that makes it easier to put it down when we finally get to that counter, with gentleness rather than a curse. These practices are not just for ourselves, not just for those within our inner circles. They can build the strong, wide, and resilient foundation upon which we construct our common life together. True community begins with that acknowledgement of all that is present, that which we welcome and acknowledge, that which we try not to think about too much, and the vast in between. We have all been carrying too much, more than we can hold in our heads, our hearts, our spirits. No matter what our circumstances, may we take the time to slow down. Like the proverbial frog in the pot, we have been getting a little warmer, and then a little warmer, and then a little warmer still, and we need to remove ourselves from this place of poisons that we do not want to live within. The illusion which can lead to separateness is our biggest enemy in these times, our biggest threat. So in this way, with generosity, with kindness, and with wisdom, may we return again to the home of our soul, more generous, more compassionate, and wiser for all that we have been through. May we give thanks and be glad for the balms that do exist, that we can be present and accounted for, connected, grateful, and content.